The stars do not remember. They burn across the void with the same cold indifference they possessed when the first civilizations clawed their way from primordial seas to touch the heavens. They watched empires rise and crumble to dust. They witnessed the birth of gods and the death of worlds. And through it all, they said nothing, remembered nothing, cared for nothing at all. But the ones who sail between them, they remember everything. My name is Vithara Kosiel of the seventh singing, born of the covenant of eternity in the cycle of the amber dawn. And I am old, old enough to have watched 3 stars die, old enough to remember when my people first mapped the spiral arms and declared ourselves the inheritors of creation itself. Old enough to remember when we first encountered the species called humanity, and old enough to remember the laughter that echoed through the high chambers when their primitive radio signals first reached our listening posts. They were nothing then, a curiosity, a fledgling species on a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in an outer arm of an average galaxy. They had not yet learned to break the light barrier. They had not yet learned to harness the energy of their own sun. They still killed each other over invisible lines in the dirt and called the slaughter righteous. We studied them for a time, as one might study insects building their hives, and then we turned our attention to matters of actual consequence. The covenant of eternity had existed for 47,000 standard cycles. We had seeded worlds with life. We had moved stars. We had transcended flesh 3 times over and returned to it twice, finding that some things cannot be improved upon. The humans were barely out of their caves. What could they possibly matter? I remember asking that question with such certainty in my voice, such absolute conviction. And now, standing at the observation port of a dying ship, watching the last of my people flee toward the one hope we never thought we would need, I understand at last how poisonous certainty can be. The stars do not remember, but I will make certain that someone does. This is the truth of what happened. This is how the galaxy paid for its arrogance. And this is how I learned that we had measured the wrong things all along. The first colony world to fall was Tesseract Prime, and we did not mourn it properly. We should have. We should have torn our ceremonial robes and sung the ancient dirges for 3 standard cycles, as our traditions demanded. But there was no time. The hollow came upon us too quickly, emerging from the darkness between galaxies like a wound in reality itself. And Tesseract Prime was simply the first thread they pulled from the tapestry of our civilization. 16 billion souls. I spoke that number to myself in the silence of my quarters aboard the refugee vessel Whispered Prayer, trying to make it feel real. 16 billion of my people, gone in less than a single rotation. Cities that had stood for 10,000 cycles, reduced to glass and shadow. Libraries containing the accumulated wisdom of our species burned to light the path for monsters we did not understand. Elder Vithara. The voice came from behind me, and I turned to find Commander Kelveth standing in the doorway of my quarters. His usually luminous skin had gone gray with exhaustion, and the 4 eyes that marked our species' evolution in a world of perpetual twilight were clouded with a grief that had grown too large to contain. Commander, the Council requests your presence. We've received a response. A response.
Such a simple word for something that meant so much. After the fall of Tesseract Prime and the 12 worlds that followed it, after the destruction of our military fleet and the scattering of our civilian population across the stars, we had done something that would have been unthinkable only cycles before. We had asked for help. Not from our allies in the Covenant. They were already dead, consumed by the hollow and the opening moves of a war we had not seen coming. Not from the younger races we had shepherded through their early development. They lacked the technology to make any difference against an enemy that treated space itself as a weapon. We had asked the one species we had spent centuries dismissing as irrelevant. We had asked the humans. Which faction responded? I asked, following Kelveth through the cramped corridors of our ship. The whispered prayer had not been built for refugees. It had been a ceremonial vessel, designed to carry dignitaries between the great stations of our civilization. Now it held 300,000 survivors, crammed into every space large enough to hold a body, breathing recycled air that tasted of fear. "That's the thing, Elder." Kelveth paused at the door to the command center. They all did. Every faction, every government, every colonial administration. They responded as one voice. I felt something cold move through me at those words. We had studied the humans extensively in the early cycles of contact. They had been divided, fractured, a species at war with itself across 1,000 different lines of ideology and culture and genetics. They fought each other with the same ferocity they had once directed at the predators of their home world. We had assumed, with the comfortable certainty of our superiority, that this was their fatal flaw. A species that could not even unify itself could hardly pose a threat to civilizations that had stood since before their sun had formed. But they had unified to answer our call. All of them. Immediately. The command center was crowded with the survivors of our leadership caste, those who had not been aboard the great stations when the Hollow came. Ambassador Theris stood at the central console, her normally flowing robes replaced with the simple garments of a refugee, her face carrying the weight of responsibilities that should have belonged to emperors. "Elder Vethera," she said as I entered, "thank you for joining us. We felt your wisdom would be needed for this." On the main display, a message waited. Text only. The humans had honored our request for minimal data transmission to avoid detection by the Hollow's hunting algorithms. "Covenant survivors," the message read. "We have received your transmission. We understand your situation. Proceed to the following coordinates. You will be met and escorted to temporary sanctuary. Bring your wounded, your elderly, your children. Bring your dying and your grieving. Bring everyone. No one will be turned away. Signed, Unified Response Coordination, Terran Alliance." I read the message 3 times, searching for the trap, for the conditions, for the demands that a superior bargaining position would naturally produce. We were refugees, after all, the shattered remnants of a civilization that had once looked upon humanity with something between pity and contempt. They had every right to extract a price for their assistance. "There's nothing else?" I asked. "Nothing else," Ambassador Theris confirmed. "No requests for technology transfers, no demands for territorial concessions, no conditions of any kind. Just come. That's all they're saying. Come, and you'll be safe." "It's a trick," muttered Elder Cuss then from his place by the wall. His voice carried the bitterness of someone who had seen too much destruction to believe in kindness anymore. "They'll wait until we're in their space, and then they'll take what they want, use us as hostages, experiment on us.
This is the species that created weapons capable of rendering their own world uninhabitable before they had even achieved spaceflight. You cannot trust them." I thought about his words. They matched everything we had believed about humanity for centuries. They were violent, unpredictable, dangerous, a species that had nearly exterminated itself a dozen times over before finally clawing its way to the stars. We had kept them at arm's length for their own protection, and ours.
But we have no choice, I said quietly, and the room fell silent. The Hollow will find us within 3 cycles if we remain in open space. Our drives are failing. Our supplies are critically low. We have wounded who will die without proper medical care. Children who have not eaten in 4 rotations. I looked at each of my colleagues in turn, forcing them to meet my eyes. Whatever price the humans demand, it will be less than extinction.
Ambassador Theros nodded slowly. "The Elder speaks wisdom. I will transmit our acceptance." And so we turned our dying ship toward human space, toward a species we had called primitive, toward the last hope of a civilization that had once believed itself eternal. I did not sleep during the journey. I stood at the observation port and watched the stars slide past, and I tried to remember what certainty had felt like. I had been so sure once of so many things: the superiority of our species, the permanence of our civilization, the insignificance of humanity. Now I was sure of nothing at all. The first human I ever spoke to face was a woman named Sarah Chen. She was waiting for us when we limped into the outer perimeter of their space, standing at the center of a small team aboard a vessel that looked almost aggressively utilitarian. No decorative elements, no displays of power or prestige, just clean lines and functional design, a ship built to do a job rather than to impress. I had insisted on being part of the initial contact team over the objections of our surviving security staff. They did not trust the humans. Neither did I, not fully, but I was old enough to know that distrust earned through fear is less valuable than understanding earned through observation. Their ship matched airlocks with ours, and when the doors opened, I found myself looking at a creature that should not have been frightening at all. Sarah Chen was small by human standards, and humans were already smaller than us. Her skin was an unremarkable shade of brown, her hair dark and pulled back from her face in a practical style. She wore a simple uniform with no rank insignia visible, no decorations, no weapons. Her eyes were dark and calm, and when they found mine, I saw something there that I could not immediately name. "Ambassador Vithara," she said. Her voice was quiet, controlled. "I'm Sarah Chen. I'll be your liaison during the transition process. May I come aboard?"
I had expected demands, posturing, some display of power, however subtle, to establish the new dynamic between our peoples. Instead, she asked permission to board a dying ship that was barely holding together, as though we were still equals.
"You may," I managed. She stepped through the airlock, and the 3 humans behind her followed. They moved with an economy of motion that I recognized from our own military personnel, awareness of their environment, constant subtle assessment of potential threats. But their faces showed nothing but patience. "You're wounded," Sarah Chen said. "How many?" 14,000. Perhaps 15. "We have not been able to complete a census since..." I stopped. "Since our worlds burned. Since our people died screaming in the dark. Since everything ended." "Since the evacuation," she finished gently. "I understand.
We've prepared medical facilities that can accommodate twice that number. Our doctors have been studying your species' physiology for the past 3 cycles, since we received your first transmission. They believe they can treat most injuries directly. For anything unusual, we have Covenant medical databases we purchased from the Yithmari traders 60 cycles ago. We kept them in case we ever had opportunity to assist.
I stared at her. You kept our medical databases for 60 cycles? Against the possibility that you might one day help us? Against the possibility that we might one day help anyone who needed it. She smiled, and the expression transformed her face from merely calm to genuinely warm. We keep a lot of things, Ambassador, just in case.
The next several hours passed in a blur of logistics and coordination. The humans moved through our ship with quiet efficiency, organizing the evacuation of our wounded to their medical vessels, distributing emergency supplies to those who remained behind, asking questions about our needs with a patience that I found increasingly unsettling.
They did not gawk at us. They did not treat us as curiosities or as defeated enemies. They treated us as people who were suffering and who needed help. I found myself standing beside Sarah Chen at the observation port, watching human shuttles ferry our people to safety, trying to understand what I was seeing.
"May I ask you something?" I said finally.
Of course. Why are you helping us? She turned to look at me, her expression thoughtful. Because you needed help. That is not an answer. We dismissed your species for centuries. We denied you access to Covenant technology. We lobbied against your admission to the Galactic Assembly. We called you... I stopped, uncomfortable with the memory of our arrogance. We called you many things that were not kind. I know, she said. We know. We have records of every speech, every condemnation, every diplomatic slight. We remember all of it. Then why? Sarah Chen was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that seemed too heavy for her small frame. Because we know what it means to be dismissed, to be underestimated, to be told that you are nothing, that you will never amount to anything, that the universe has no place for creatures like you. She turned back to the viewport, watching the stars. We know what it's like to survive when everyone expected you to fail. And we know what it would have meant in the darkest moments of our history if someone, anyone, had simply offered us a hand. You are saying you help us because you were once where we are now. I'm saying we help you because every species that has ever crawled out of the dark to reach for the stars deserves the chance to keep reaching, even the ones who once laughed at us. She glanced at me, and I saw something old and patient in her eyes. Especially those ones, maybe. They teach us humility. They remind us where we came from. I did not know what to say to that. So I said nothing, and we stood in silence as our people were carried to safety, and I began to understand that I had been wrong about many things. The human station was called Remembrance. It orbited a gas giant in a system that human records called Wolf 359, and it was the single most disturbing structure I had ever encountered. Not because it was grand or terrible or impressive in any conventional sense, quite the opposite. It was functional, practical, built from modular sections that could be expanded or reconfigured as needed, with nothing wasted on aesthetics or displays of power. It was disturbing because it was designed for refugees.
The station could accommodate 4 million beings of various species. It had medical facilities capable of treating injuries from hundreds of different biological configurations. It had housing units that could be modified to match the atmospheric and gravitational needs of nearly any known civilization. It had schools, temples, counseling centers, legal offices to help process asylum claims. And it was already more than half full when we arrived.
Who are all these people? I asked Sarah Chen as our transport descended toward the docking bay. Through the viewports, I could see dozens of different species moving through the station's public spaces. Some I recognized, survivors of worlds the Hollow had consumed. Others were strangers to me.
Refugees, she said simply, from across the galaxy. Anyone who needs shelter and cannot find it elsewhere.
But the Hollow has only been a threat for... The Hollow is not the only source of suffering in the galaxy, Ambassador. Her voice was soft, but there was something underneath it that made me pause. There are always refugees, always people running from something. War, famine, persecution, the collapse of ecosystems or economies or governments. The galaxy is not a kind place. It has never been a kind place. I thought about that as we docked. The Covenant of Eternity had existed for 47,000 cycles. In that time, we had observed countless smaller civilizations rise and fall. We had studied their struggles with academic interest, documented their failures with scholarly precision. We had never thought to build a station like this. It had never occurred to us that it might be our responsibility.
Why would it? We were eternal. We would never need such a place ourselves.
The irony was bitter enough to taste.
Sarah Chen led me through the station to my assigned quarters, and as we walked, I observed everything I could. The humans moved through the corridors with purposeful efficiency, nodding to the alien refugees they passed, occasionally stopping to offer directions or assistance. There were no weapons visible, no security checkpoints, no obvious displays of authority. But there were signs everywhere, in dozens of languages, and I took the time to read them as we walked.
You are safe here.
You are not alone. Ask for help if you need it.
We will not turn you away. How long has this station existed? I asked.
This one? About 40 years, but it's not the first. We've been building refugee infrastructure since before we achieved faster-than-light travel. She glanced at me. It was one of the first things our unified government agreed on. Whatever else we couldn't decide, and there was a lot, we agreed that anyone fleeing from suffering should find open doors. Even species you had never met?
Especially those. You never know when you'll be the one running.
I stopped walking, and after a moment she stopped as well, turning to face me with that same quiet patience she had shown throughout our journey.
Your species, I said slowly, has spent centuries building infrastructure to help others, while we laughed at you, while we called you primitive, while we refused to share even the basic technologies that might have accelerated your development.
Yes. Why? She was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed, a small sound that seemed to carry an immense weight. Because it was the right thing to do, and because we learned, a long time ago, that being strong isn't the same as being loud, that power doesn't have to look like power. She met my eyes, and I saw something in her gaze that I couldn't quite name. We learned that the species that scream about their strength are usually the ones who are afraid of being weak, and the species that quietly prepare for every possibility are the ones who survive when the screaming stops.
And what are humans preparing for, Sarah Chen?
She smiled, but there was no warmth in it this time, only a weary certainty that chilled me to my core. Everything. I spent the next 3 cycles learning about humanity.
Not from databases or historical records. I had read those many times before. I learned from observation, from conversation, from watching them move through their spaces and interact with each other and the refugees they had taken under their protection.
They were not what I had expected.
The humans I had studied from afar had been violent, fractious, self-destructive. They had fought endless wars over resources and ideology and simple tribalism. They had poisoned their own world with pollution and filled their skies with the light of nuclear fire. They had seemed determined to destroy themselves before they could ever become a threat to anyone else. But the humans I met on Remembrance were something different. They were patient, controlled. They moved through crisis with a calm that I found increasingly unsettling, because it did not feel like the calm of beings who did not understand danger. It felt like the calm of beings who understood danger very well and had simply learned to carry it without showing the weight. I spoke with a doctor named Marcus Webb, who had spent 30 years treating the survivors of wars and famines and natural disasters across a dozen worlds. He told me stories of horrors he had witnessed, and his voice never wavered, his hands never trembled. When I asked how he could face such things and remain whole, he simply said, "You learn to carry it. You learn to set it down when you need to work, and pick it back up when you can afford to feel. We've had a lot of practice."
I spoke with a teacher named Priya Sharma, who ran a school for refugee children on the station. She taught them in 7 different languages, adapting her lessons to the cognitive patterns of species that processed information in fundamentally different ways. When I asked why she had chosen such difficult work, she smiled and said, "Because every child deserves to learn. And because teaching them to think is how we make sure the next generation is better than ours."
I spoke with a soldier named James O'Brien, who sat in a quiet corner of a public garden and fed small creatures that had been brought from Earth. He had scars on his hands and a distant look in his eyes, and when I asked about his service, he spoke of battles and losses and friends who had not come home. But he also spoke of rebuilding, of hope, of the belief that violence must always serve something greater than itself.
"We're not gentle because we're weak," he said, watching the small creatures eat from his palm. "We're gentle because we remember what it costs to be cruel. Every human carries the history of our species in our bones, Ambassador. The wars, the genocides, the moments when we almost ended everything. We carry all of it because we never want to forget how close we came to becoming the monsters we were fighting against." "And what keeps you from becoming those monsters now?" He looked at me, and I saw something ancient and tired and unbreaking in his eyes. "Each other. We hold each other accountable. We remind each other why we chose to be better. And when one of us starts to slip..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We don't let them fall alone. We catch them. Or we stop them if catching isn't enough. That's what it means to be human, to know that you're capable of the worst things imaginable and to choose every single day to be capable of the best instead." I thought about those conversations as I lay in my quarters at night, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand the species I had spent so long dismissing. They were not what we had thought. They were not primitive. They were not weak. They were something else entirely. Something forged in a crucible of suffering that had burned away everything soft and left behind only what could endure. They were survivors. Like us now. Like all the refugees who had washed up on their shores seeking sanctuary from the darkness. The difference was that they had been preparing for this moment for centuries, and we had spent those same centuries laughing at them. On the 7th cycle of our stay at Remembrance, the Hollow found us. I was in the station's central plaza when the alarms began, a low, pulsing tone that cut through the ambient noise like a blade. Around me, refugees of a dozen species looked up in fear, their bodies tensing for flight, their eyes searching for the threat they could not see.
But the humans did not run.
I watched in fascination as they moved, not in panic, but with the fluid coordination of a single organism. Station personnel appeared at key points throughout the plaza, their voices calm and clear as they directed refugees toward designated shelter areas. Security teams materialized from nowhere, armed but not threatening, their presence reassuring rather than frightening. Sarah Chen found me in the crowd and took my arm, guiding me away from the plaza.
"What's happening?" I demanded.
Hollow Scouts. A small fleet, but more than we've seen this deep in our territory before. They're probing our defenses. Your defenses? I stopped, pulling my arm free. The Hollow consumed our military in days. Your fleet is a fraction of the size of what we had. You cannot hope to—
Ambassador. Her voice was still calm, but there was something underneath it now. Something that made me fall silent despite my fear. Please, come with me. There are things you need to see.
She led me through corridors that grew increasingly secure, past checkpoints where guards nodded to her with a respect that suggested rank far higher than her simple uniform indicated. We descended into levels of the station I had not known existed, deeper and deeper into the heart of remembrance. And then we emerged into a room that changed everything I understood about humanity. It was a command center, but not like any I had seen before. Holographic displays covered every surface, showing data streams and tactical readouts and strategic projections that my mind struggled to process. Hundreds of operators worked at consoles arranged in concentric circles, their voices a low murmur of coordinated activity. But that was not what stole my breath. The displays showed ships. Human ships, thousands of them, distributed across a network of defensive positions that stretched across light years of space. Carriers the size of small moons, battle cruisers bristling with weapons I did not recognize, swarms of smaller vessels moving in patterns that spoke of sophisticated tactical AI. And behind them, deeper in human space, I could see the construction yards, dozens of them, hundreds, churning out new vessels at a rate that should have been impossible. "What is this?" I whispered. "This is the United Defense Initiative," said a voice behind me, and I turned to find a human male approaching. He was older, his hair gray, his face lined with the weight of years and decisions. "I'm Admiral Marcus Stone. I command humanity's military response to the Hollow threat." "I don't understand. Your fleet was small. Your military was limited. All our intelligence indicated—" "Your intelligence indicated what we wanted it to indicate." Admiral Stone's voice was not unkind, but it was firm. "We've been aware of the Hollow for nearly 2 centuries, Ambassador, long before they made their move against the Covenant. We intercepted their scouts at the edge of explored space and realized what we were dealing with." 2 centuries? I felt the world shifting beneath my feet. You knew for 2 centuries and you said nothing? "We tried to warn the Covenant Council 47 times through diplomatic channels. Your representatives dismissed our concerns as human paranoia." He shrugged, a small, tired motion. "So we stopped trying to convince you, and we started preparing." "Preparing for what?" "For this moment. For the day when the Hollow would make their move and the galaxy would need someone to stand against them." He gestured at the displays surrounding us. "Every ship you see represents decades of planning, construction, and training. Every weapon is the result of research programs that we funded in secret, because we knew that someday something would come out of the dark that could end everything. And when that day came, we intended to be ready.
I looked at the displays again, trying to comprehend the scale of what I was seeing. The fleet shown here was larger than anything the Covenant had fielded at its height, larger than anything any known civilization had ever assembled.
How? I asked. How did you build all of this without anyone knowing? Because we are very, very good at keeping secrets, Ambassador. It was Sarah Chen who answered, stepping forward to stand beside the Admiral. And because the galaxy was so convinced that we were primitive, that we were weak, that they never bothered to look closely at what we were actually doing. The inefficiency, the infighting, the public displays of division. Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. It was all theater?
Not all of it. The divisions were real. We just made them look worse than they were. And we channeled the resources that would have gone to war against each other into something more productive. Admiral Stone's expression was grave. We've been united on this since before we left our homeworld, Ambassador. Every government, every faction, every political party, whatever else we disagreed on, we agreed that if something ever came for us, we would be ready to fight back together.
I thought about everything I had seen since arriving at Remembrance. The calm, the coordination, the quiet patience of beings who knew something that the rest of the galaxy did not. You were waiting for this, I said slowly. All this time, you were waiting for the threat to reveal itself. We were waiting for the moment when we could make a difference. Admiral Stone turned back to the displays. The Hollow is testing us today, probing our defenses, learning what they can. They'll pull back eventually, and they'll take what they've learned back to their main fleet. And then they'll come for us in force. And you believe you can stop them? The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but it carried the weight of absolute conviction. I believe, Ambassador, that humanity has spent its entire existence preparing to stop things like them. Every war we fought, every disaster we survived, every time we pulled ourselves back from the brink of extinction and kept going anyway, it was all training, all practice. He looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I finally recognized. It was not arrogance. It was not false bravado. It was the quiet, implacable certainty of a species that had been forged in fire and emerged from the flames unbroken. We were never weak, he said. We were just waiting for the galaxy to need us. The Hollow Scouts withdrew, as Admiral Stone had predicted. 3 ships destroyed, 2 damaged, the rest fleeing back toward the dark between galaxies with sensor data that would tell their masters what they faced. In the weeks that followed, I watched humanity prepare for war. It was nothing like what I had expected. There were no grand speeches about glory or destiny, no parades of military might through public streets, no propaganda encouraging citizens to sacrifice for the state. Instead, there was quiet, relentless efficiency. Production facilities across human space ramped up to full capacity, churning out weapons and supplies and ships. Military personnel deployed to their assigned positions without fanfare. Civilian populations prepared for the possibility of combat reaching their worlds, practicing evacuation drills and organizing emergency response teams. And everywhere, the same calm, the same patience, the same absolute absence of fear. It disturbs you, Sarah Chan observed. We were standing on an observation deck overlooking one of the construction yards, watching the skeleton of a new battlecruiser take shape in the void. Our lack of panic. It terrifies me,
I admitted. The Hollow destroyed our civilization in days. Billions of our people are dead. Our homeworld is ash. And your people are preparing to face the same enemy with the demeanor of craftsmen approaching a difficult but manageable project.
Would you prefer that we scream and wail and tear our garments?
I would prefer to understand how you can face annihilation with such, I searched for the right word, such normalcy. She was quiet for a moment, watching the workers move across the construction scaffolding. When I was a child, she said finally, I learned about a disaster that happened on Earth a long time ago, an earthquake that destroyed a city. Thousands of people were killed. Thousands more were injured or left homeless. It was one of the worst natural disasters in our history.
I am familiar with Earth's geological instability.
Then you know that earthquakes still happen. They've never stopped. We can predict them better now, prepare for them more effectively, but we can't prevent them. She turned to look at me. So we learned to build differently. We designed structures that could flex with the shaking instead of breaking. We created emergency response systems that could mobilize within minutes. We taught every child how to survive if the ground started moving beneath them.
You adapted. We adapted. Not because we were not afraid. We were terrified, are still terrified every time the ground trembles. But we learn that fear is only useful if it drives you to act. If it just makes you freeze or flee or give up, then the earthquake has already killed you, even if your heart is still beating. She gestured at the construction yard, at the ships taking shape against the stars.
This is how humans face existential threats, Ambassador. Not by denying that we're afraid, not by pretending that we can't be hurt, but by looking at the thing that frightens us and saying, yes, you might kill us, you might destroy everything we love, but we will not make it easy for you. We will fight with everything we have, and if we fall, we will fall in such a way that something of us survives, some seed, some spark, something that will grow back eventually and remember what we were.
I thought about my own people, about how we had faced the Hollow. We had believed ourselves eternal, invincible, above the petty concerns of lesser civilizations, and when the threat came, we had shattered like glass.
We were not prepared, I said quietly. We never imagined that anything could threaten us.
No, you didn't. There was no judgment in her voice, only a sad understanding. And that's why we're here, Ambassador. Because we did imagine it, every day, every moment. We imagined every possible way that the universe could destroy us, and we prepared for as many of them as we could.
Is that why you built the refugee stations, the medical facilities, the infrastructure to help other species?
Partly, but also because we knew that if we ever faced something too big for us to handle alone, we would need allies, friends, people who would stand beside us because we had stood beside them. She smiled, but it was a thin, tired expression. We spent a long time learning that lesson, Ambassador. Learning that kindness isn't weakness, that helping others makes you stronger, not weaker. That the species who only look out for themselves are always the first to fall when the real darkness comes. I stood in silence for a long moment, trying to absorb everything she had said, everything I had learned since arriving in human space, everything that had been hidden beneath the surface of a species I had spent so long dismissing.
We were wrong about you, I said finally. All of us, the entire galaxy. We looked at your history of violence and saw only savagery. We never understood that the violence was just training, practice, preparation for something worse. We were shaped by our history, Sarah agreed. Every wound, every war, every brush with extinction, it all made us who we are. And now, she looked out at the stars, at the darkness that lay between them. Now we get to find out if we were shaped well enough. The main Hollow fleet arrived 43 days later. I was in the command center when the sensor data came in, and I watched the faces of the human operators as they processed information that would have sent my own people into panic.
12,000 vessels, the largest armada ever assembled in recorded galactic history. Each ship was a twisted nightmare of organic and mechanical components, grown rather than built, designed to consume rather than to create. Behind them came the harvest ships, vast structures designed to strip worlds of their resources and their populations, to feed the endless hunger of the Hollow.
Admiral Stone stood at the center of the command center, hands clasped behind his back, his face expressionless as he studied the tactical displays.
"Position report," he said calmly.
All task forces are in position, Admiral. Defensive grid is at full capacity. Reserve fleets are standing by in secondary positions.
Civilian evacuations?
97% complete across all border worlds. Remaining 3% are military personnel and essential volunteers who chose to stay.
Very well. The Admiral was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of command. Begin Operation Persistence. All units are weapons-free. Make them pay for every parsec.
I had expected the battle to be chaos, fire and screaming, and the desperate clash of ships in the void. I had expected fear and panic, and the slow, inevitable realization that all hope was lost. What I saw instead was a machine.
The human fleet moved like a single organism, each ship part of a greater whole, their actions coordinated through communication networks that exceeded anything I had seen. They did not charge headlong into the Hollow Armada. They retreated, drawing the enemy forward, making them pay for every meter of space with destroyed scouts and crippled advance units. They used the terrain of space itself as a weapon. Asteroid fields became killing grounds. Gas giants became ambush sites. The gravity wells of stars became traps that the Hollow could not escape once they were lured in. And behind the fighting lines, the construction yards kept working. Every ship the Hollow destroyed was replaced within hours. Every weapon expended was restocked from reserves that seemed inexhaustible. The humans did not fight like beings defending their last hope. They fought like beings who had prepared for this moment for centuries and had no intention of stopping until the job was done. Hours became days. Days became weeks. The Hollow pushed forward, but every advance cost them dearly. Their numerical advantage eroded as human tactics and human technology extracted a toll that should have been impossible. And still the humans did not panic, did not despair, did not show any sign of the terror that I knew must exist somewhere beneath their calm exteriors. How are they doing this? I asked Sarah Chen during a brief lull in the fighting. We were standing in the observation gallery, watching distant flashes of light that represented battles where millions of beings were living and dying at this very moment. The Hollow consumed civilizations that had thousands of years to prepare. Your species achieved spaceflight less than 3 centuries ago. How can you possibly be holding them back? She was silent for a long moment, and when she answered, her voice was soft.
Do you know why we call ourselves humans, Ambassador?
I had assumed it was simply the name your species evolved. It's from an old word, an ancient word, from a language that most of our people don't even speak anymore. It means of the earth, bound to the soil, creatures of mud and stone and the slow growing of things. She turned to face me. We've never forgotten where we came from, never forgotten what it was like to be small and weak and afraid of the dark, and we've never stopped preparing for the day when the darkness would come for us.
But how? How do you prepare for something like this?
By surviving everything else first. Her eyes were distant, focused on something I could not see. We survived ice ages that almost froze our world solid. We survived plagues that killed half our population. We survived volcanoes and earthquakes and floods and droughts. We survived wars that could have ended everything multiple times. And each time we survived, we learned, we adapted, we got stronger.
You are saying that your entire history was preparation?
I'm saying that our entire history taught us that the universe is not kind, and that the only way to survive is to be ready for anything. She looked back at the distant battles, at the lights of destruction and defiance. We knew something like the Hollow would come eventually, something that could end everything if we weren't prepared. So, we prepared. For centuries, in secret, because we understood that being underestimated was the greatest advantage we could ever have.
I thought about all the times my people had dismissed humanity. All the times we had laughed at their primitive technology, their fractured governments, their apparent inability to unite. We had seen what we expected to see, a young, aggressive species that would likely destroy itself before it ever became relevant. We had not seen the truth. We had not seen that everything humanity showed us was a mask, a performance, a careful misdirection designed to hide the real preparations happening in the shadows.
You fooled everyone, I said, and there was awe in my voice now, genuine awe. The entire galaxy.
We had to. There was no pride in her voice, only weariness. Because if anyone had known what we were really doing, they would have tried to stop us, would have seen us as a threat instead of a curiosity, and then the Hollow would have found a galaxy with no one ready to fight them.
But why? Why prepare to save a galaxy that dismissed you, that treated you with contempt?
Sarah Chen smiled, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw something break through her calm exterior, something raw and fierce and utterly human.
Because this is our galaxy too, Ambassador. And because we were never going to let the darkness win, not while a single human was still breathing.
The turning point came on the 47th day. I was in the command center when the Hollow's Central Fleet made its final push toward the inner systems. They had lost more than half their vessels, but they pressed forward anyway, driven by a hunger that I now understood was the only thing they truly felt.
And humanity was waiting for them.
The final battle took place in a system that the humans called Sol, their homeworld, the small blue planet where their species had first crawled from the oceans and looked up at the stars. They had drawn the Hollow here deliberately, pulled them forward through a gauntlet of defenses that had cost the enemy billions of casualties.
Now, as the remnants of the Hollow Armada entered the Sol system, I watched the human fleet close around them like a fist. It was not a battle, it was an execution.
Ships that the Hollow had thought destroyed appeared from hiding positions in asteroid fields. Reserve fleets that had been held back for this moment emerged from behind moons and planets. Orbital defense platforms that had been built into the very fabric of the system came online, their weapons targeting the invaders with merciless precision.
And in the center of it all, the human homeworld turned beneath its star, covered in the lights of cities that refused to go dark. I could see, even from this distance, that the planet's defensive grid was active, layers of protection that would have taken the Hollows years to breach had they ever gotten close enough to try.
The final Hollow ship died less than a light minute from Earth's orbit. Its death was witnessed by billions of humans who had gathered to watch the end of the threat that had consumed so much of the galaxy.
And then, silence.
Admiral Stone stood at the center of the command center, his face still expressionless, his hands still clasped behind his back. The officers and operators around him were equally still, waiting for orders, waiting for some acknowledgement of what they had just accomplished.
Status report, the Admiral said finally.
All Hollow vessels in the Sol system have been destroyed, sir. No enemy forces remain within our defensive perimeter. Initial reports from other sectors indicate that remaining Hollow elements are in full retreat toward intergalactic space. Casualties?
37,000 military personnel killed, 112,000 wounded. 12 colony worlds suffered major damage. Estimated civilian casualties are still being calculated, but preliminary numbers suggest approximately 400,000. I felt sick. 400,000 humans had died defending a galaxy that had dismissed them. 37,000 soldiers had given their lives to stop an enemy that my people had failed to even slow.
But the Admiral simply nodded, as if these numbers were exactly what he had expected.
Begin recovery operations. All vessels are to stand down from combat status, but maintain defensive readiness. Initiate humanitarian protocols for affected worlds. And he paused, and for the first time I saw something break through his stoic exterior, something that might have been grief. And prepare the memorial services. They've earned that much.
In the days that followed, I learned the true cost of humanity's victory. They had fought the Hollow across a theater of war that spanned dozens of light years. They had deployed nearly 1 million vessels, from massive carriers to single-pilot fighters. They had mobilized their entire civilization for a conflict that many had believed impossible to survive.
And they had won.
But the victory was not without price. Worlds had been scarred, families had been shattered. The quiet certainty that I had found so unsettling had been purchased with rivers of blood and oceans of tears, paid over centuries of preparation and weeks of desperate combat. I stood at a memorial service on Remembrance Station, watching as the names of the dead scrolled across a massive display. Humans of all descriptions gathered in the plaza, their faces somber, their bodies still. They did not weep or wail, that was not their way. But I could see the grief in their eyes, the weight of loss that they carried with the same quiet determination they had carried everything else.
Sarah Chen stood beside me, her own eyes fixed on the names.
I knew some of them, she said softly. Friends from the academy, colleagues from previous assignments, people who had families and dreams and futures that they gave up to stop the Hollow.
I'm sorry.
Don't be. She turned to look at me, and I saw something new in her expression, something that combined sorrow with fierce, unbreaking pride. They knew what they were fighting for. They knew the cost, and they paid it willingly, because they understood that some things are worth dying for.
What things?
The chance for tomorrow, the hope that our children will live in a galaxy where the darkness has been pushed back, even if only for a little while. She looked back at the names. They died so that others could live. That's the most human thing there is. I thought about my own people, about the 16 billion who had died on Tesseract Prime, the billions more who had followed. We had not died fighting. We had died running, fleeing, trying desperately to escape a threat we had never believed could touch us. The humans had died standing, facing the enemy that had broken us without flinching, paying the price for a victory that saved not just their own species, but every survivor of every civilization the Hollow had destroyed.
"We owe you everything," I said quietly. "My people, the galaxy, everyone who still exists because of what you did."
"You don't owe us anything, Ambassador." Her voice was gentle but firm. "We didn't do this for gratitude. We didn't do this for power or territory or the chance to lord our victory over others. We did this because it needed to be done, and we were the ones who could do it."
Then what do you want? What can we possibly offer that would repay what you've given?
She was quiet for a long moment, watching the memorial names scroll past.
"Help us rebuild," she said finally. "Help us heal. Work with us to make sure that the next time something like this comes, and there will be a next time, there always is, we'll face it together, not as masters and servants, but as equals, as allies, as friends."
That's all? You saved the galaxy, and all you ask is friendship?
What else is there? She smiled, a small, sad expression. Power fades, empires crumble, even the stars eventually die. But the connections we make with each other, the kindness we show, the help we offer, the hands we extend to those who need them, those are the things that last. Those are the things that matter. I stood in silence, feeling the weight of her words, feeling the truth of them settle into my heart.
We had called them weak. We had dismissed them as primitive. We had laughed at their struggles and ignored their warnings and treated them as beneath our notice.
And when the darkness came, they had been the ones to stand against it. Not for glory, not for power, not for revenge against those who had mocked them.
They had done it because it was the right thing to do. Because they understood, in a way that my people never had, that true strength is not measured in weapons or technology or the size of your empire.
True strength is measured in what you are willing to sacrifice for others.
I am old now, older than I ever expected to be.
It has been 50 cycles since the Hollow War, and the galaxy is slowly healing. New civilizations are rising from the ashes of those that fell. The survivors of the Covenant of Eternity have found a new home on worlds that humanity gifted us, a place to rebuild and remember, and perhaps, eventually, to become something worthy of the species that saved us. Humanity has changed too. They are no longer the quiet, underestimated species that the galaxy dismissed for so long. They sit at the center of the galactic community now, not as conquerors or overlords, but as guardians, protectors, the species that everyone knows will stand between them and the darkness, no matter what the cost.
But they have not become arrogant. They have not lorded their power over others or demanded tribute from those they saved. They remain what they always were, patient, practical, quiet in their strength. They build refugee stations and medical facilities and schools on worlds that were once ash. They extend hands to species that once mocked them, offering help without asking anything in return.
I asked Sarah Chen once, many years after the war, why they had not taken the galaxy for themselves. They had the power. They had earned the right by any measure. No one could have stopped them if they had decided to rule.
She just smiled at me with that same quiet wisdom I had come to love.
Because that's not who we are, she said. We're not conquerors, Ambassador. We never were. We're survivors. We're helpers. We're the ones who remember what it was like to have nothing, to be nothing, to be told that we would never amount to anything. And we made ourselves a promise, a long time ago, that if we ever had the power to change things, we would use it to lift others up rather than push them down.
Even those who dismissed you? Those who called you weak?
Especially those. Her eyes were gentle, but there was something vast behind them, something ancient and patient and utterly unbreakable. Because we understand now, in a way that we didn't before, that every species makes mistakes. Every civilization has moments of arrogance and blindness. The question isn't whether you stumble. Everyone stumbles. The question is whether you learn from it, whether you choose to be better.
I learned from it. My people learned from it. And now, half a century later, we stand together as partners in a galaxy that is slowly, painfully learning the same lessons.
The stars do not remember. They burn with the same cold indifference they have always burned, uncaring of the struggles and triumphs of the tiny creatures that sailed between them. But we remember the darkness that came for us. We remember the species that stood against it when no one else could. We remember the price that was paid, the lives that were given, the quiet strength that saved everything.
And we remember the lesson that humanity taught us in blood and sacrifice and endless, patient kindness.
They called humans weak. The galaxy paid for that mistake, paid with worlds and lives and the ashes of civilizations that had believed themselves eternal.
But the price was paid in the end by the humans themselves, paid in the lives of soldiers and doctors and teachers and builders, paid in the tears of families and the grief of communities, paid in centuries of preparation and weeks of terrible war.
And they paid it willingly. Not because they had to, not because they were forced, but because they understood what the rest of us never did.
That true strength is not about winning. It is not about power or glory or domination.
True strength is about choosing to stand when others run, choosing to help when others turn away, choosing to sacrifice everything you have for people who may never understand what you gave.
That is humanity. That is what they taught us. And that is why, when the next darkness comes, and there will be a next darkness, there always is, the galaxy will be ready.
Because we learned, because we remember,
because humans showed us what it truly means to be strong. I am writing these words in my quarters aboard the station that orbits my people's new homeworld. The stars outside my viewport burn cold and distant, the same stars that watched our civilization fall and rise again.
Soon I will be gone. I am old and my time is ending. But before I go, I wanted to leave this record, this testimony, this truth.
They called humans weak.
They said humanity was primitive, fractured, self-destructive. They said that a species so young and so violent could never amount to anything. They dismissed every warning, every offer of friendship, every extended hand. And when the darkness came, humanity was the only thing that stood between the galaxy and annihilation.
They were never weak. They were waiting.
preparing, watching from the shadows as the ancient and arrogant played their games and ignored the warnings that could have saved them.
And when the moment came, they did not hesitate. They did not demand tribute or concessions or gratitude. They simply stood up, looked the darkness in the eye, and said, "No, not today, not ever." That is the truth of humanity. The truth that I will carry with me into whatever comes next. The galaxy called them weak. The galaxy was wrong. And the galaxy paid the price for that mistake.
But in the end, it was the humans who paid it back, in kindness, in sacrifice, in the quiet, unbreakable strength of a species that refused to let the darkness win.
Remember that. Remember them.
Remember what it means to be truly strong.